All right. I think we should go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We're really happy that folks have showed up, and hopefully you got the information about, what Casey Carl is going to be presenting in this meeting, either through a mailer in the mailbox, online, whatever. But regardless of what method you saw, we're happy you are here. So just before we hand it over to Casey, I'm just gonna read a little bit about him to introduce him. So Casey Carl is the Minneapolis City Clerk, and he's held this position since August of 2010. As clerk, his most important responsibility is administering elections and ensuring all voters have access to the ballot box. As the city's records custodian and responsible authority, Casey also is tasked with providing management of the city's information, assets, and making government data accessible to the public. Finally, Casey serves as the clerk and parliamentarian of the city council and manages its legislative process. In addition to this role, Casey is a member of several professional industry organizations, including the International Institute of Municipal Clerks, the International Association of Governance Officials, the National Association of Election Officials, the National Association of Parliamentarians, and the Minnesota Clerks Finance Officers Association, among others. So quite a resume here. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Casey, and he will start his presentation.
Thank you, Meg. My name is Casey Carl. Most importantly, I have the privilege of serving as the city clerk here in Minneapolis. And tonight I'm here to share with you information about 3 ballot questions that are proposing amendments to our city charter. I'm going to first see if I can share my screen with all of you. And Meg, if you can just confirm, because it's always fun if I can't get it done. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Oh, good. So I'll jump right into this presentation. And I did send my slides to Meg, so feel free to share those with the members however you wish. I did include my notes and several citations with the slides, if that's interesting to you. And so hopefully you'll use that as a resource. Tonight, we're going to talk, as I mentioned, about 3 ballot questions that are proposing to amend our city's charter. And I'm going to start by trying to level set. I know many of you active in your neighborhoods probably know this stuff, but just for the sake of building up to what those questions are, the city's home rule charter is like our city's constitution. Now, legally, a home rule charter is actually a delegation by the state of its sovereign inherent authority to govern, and it's delegated to the local level. We are then to exercise that sovereign authority for the benefit of the people of the city. So again, functioning as a kind of city constitution, it does many things, but some of the most important are listed on this slide. For example, it will define for us what powers and authority the city have, again, granted to the city by the people of the city to be exercised in their behalf. 2, it prescribes how our city is structured, how it operates, who its principal officers are, how those officers are selected, whether election or appointment, what their qualifications for office are and their duties. And then it also provides for the formal processes by which the city acts. So this would be the city's legislative process, our finance and budgeting pieces, land use, and some other formal authorities that are prescribed within that constitution or home rule charter. The 3 questions that we're going to be discussing tonight that I know all of you have already heard about, I'm hoping by talking about this, you can see as I discuss them with you, how they touch on these 3 major pieces of our city's constitution. They do talk about the powers of city government. They talk about our operating structure and the officers, and they do talk about decision-making processes. So with that foundation, we'll move forward. What I'm going to try and do is present each of these 3 questions. So the 3 questions are: 1, on government structure. There's a second one about public safety department, whether we should have a new public safety department. And the third one is about an ordinance, which would prescribe a policy about rent stabilization. So in order to make sure we stay within the same neutral fact-based frame, I will present each of these questions in the same way. I'm going to first present a slide that talks about how did this question get submitted to the ballot, under what authority and by whom. I'm going to then talk about what are the major elements of each of the questions if approved by voters. Because I'm a very visual learner, I have some very basic charts that show the impact of each of these questions. And then I have the actual language of the ballot for each of the questions that I'll share with you. After I've finished all three of those, I'll provide some information about where you can go find some more information from the city's website and other resources. And then I'll be happy to respond to any questions or issues that people might have. And Meg, if you can help me with the Q&A, because I really can't see the folks who are attending. So we'll start with the first one, which is about government structure. This is a proposal to change the city's underlying government structure. It was initiated or originated by our city's charter commission. And to borrow that analogy just a little bit further, I said that the home rule charter is like our constitution. Well, the charter commission would be like our standing constitutional convention. They are, under both state constitution and state law, the body of voters, of electorate members of the city of Minneapolis who hold that charter in trust for the people. They're appointed by the chief judge of the district court, and they have the authority to develop and submit to voters proposals to amend the charter. Also, they get to weigh in on proposals to amend the charter by anybody else. So each of these three proposals we're going to talk about tonight, this one was generated by the Charter Commission. The other two were touched and reviewed by the Charter Commission. This proposal was submitted by the Charter Commission pursuant to the authority given to it under state law. That's Minnesota Statutes 410.12 subdivision 1. And all of the information about this question you can find in our Legislative Information Management System, also known as LIMS. And I've given you the file number here, CH 2021-12. So that's how this question came to be. The next slide, we're going to be talking about the major elements of this proposal if approved by voters. And so here they are. There are 5 major elements. First, it would, as I mentioned, change our government's underlying structure based on what's known as a separation of powers model that provides checks and balances between an elected executive called the mayor and an elected legislative body called the council. Most of us are very familiar with this system of government from high school civics, if nothing else, because this is the system of government that is in place at the federal level between an elected president and elected Congress, and at all 50 of our state legislatures between a governor and a state legislature. So that's the basic premise of a separation of powers model. Therefore, number 2, it would define the city council as being the city's legislative body. Number 3, it would define the mayor as being the city's chief executive officer. Number 4, it would eliminate the executive committee. And I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to it in a minute because there's a lot of detail on that. And then number 5, it would take the city's operating departments and call that the administration, reporting to the mayor. So those are the 5 major elements of this question. And next I want to bring up an org chart so we can talk about what is in place today, and then an org chart that shows what would be in place if this question passed, so you can see the difference visually. So here is an organizational chart, a table of organization for the city of Minneapolis today. Under the current charter, this is how the city is structured. And you'll notice at the top of the chart, you have your elected officials, the mayor and council, and they're joined with a line. Now, I tell people when I do this presentation, I'm not from Minnesota, I'm not from Minneapolis, I'm originally from Kansas. And so when I first moved here, I heard a lot of stuff about the way that our city government was described as a weak mayor or a strong mayor or a balanced strong mayor, strong council, or a strong council. And I know for some people this is hearsay, but the reality is none of those descriptions are true. The reality is that the charter in Minneapolis was developed in a very unique way, unlike any other charter, and it created a system of government in which we have a system of shared powers, which is why I've drawn that line connecting the mayor and council. There's really not much that the mayor can do without the council, and there's not much the council can do without the mayor. It takes that combination of both the mayor and the council to really get anything done. And you'll see below that line is that group I talked about, this executive committee. If you haven't heard about the executive committee, it's unfortunate language sometimes limits us. It is not a committee of council. I'm sure all of you know that our city council has a series of standing committees that meet and conduct business. The executive committee is not one of them. It is an independent body that exists within the city. So is the audit committee, shown here as well. But they're not committees of council. The executive committee was created in 1984 by then Mayor Don Frazier, who wanted to clarify and streamline authorities and separation of authorities between the mayor and council, specific to the appointment of department heads. That was really the crux of the issue. And so he campaigned to put a question on the ballot in 1984, and the voters approved it. And based on that approved referendum by the voters, this separate body called the executive committee was created. What it does is unite the mayor and council, a smaller version of the council, in this body. So the mayor is automatically, or ex officio, the chair of the executive committee. The other members include the president of the city council and 3 members of the city council that are picked by the council when they organize each term. So those 4 members of the city council and the mayor as the chair of this committee are the group that is the appointing authority for the 10 charter departments in the city. And those are shown directly below the executive committee within that dotted line. Those are the charter departments you sometimes hear us talk about. The heads of each of those departments are appointed by the executive committee and then have that reporting relationship up to the mayor and the council. So you can see that includes the assessor, the attorney, the director of civil rights. CPED is the Community Planning Economic Development Department, Fire, Health, Police, Public Works, Regulatory Services, and City Coordinator. That last one I just mentioned in the middle, coordinator, is a charter department head and functions in the city of Minneapolis structure very much like a city manager that you may have heard about in other cities. Most cities around us have a city manager form of government. And so that coordinator position actually appoints and supervises the other 10 departments that you see at the bottom of the list. Those departments, 311, 911, communications, emergency management, the convention center, our intergovernmental relations, HR, finance, property services, IT, neighborhood and community relations. Those departments are not appointed by, nor do they report to the mayor and council. The mayor and the council can't touch them. Those departments are considered extensions of the city coordinator. So the 10 departments in the middle are really the charter departments, and they are appointed by and can only be dismissed by the executive committee, not by the mayor or the council. The executive committee is that controlling agency. So that's why back on that previous slide where I said the proposed amendment eliminates the executive committee, kind of a big deal. They're the ones that actually appoint and supervise those 10 charter departments. So the next chart I'm going to show you is this changed to reflect what would happen if the ballot question proposed on government structure was approved. So here you can see clearly the executive committee is eliminated, and there's a much solid darker line from the mayor to those same 10 departments, and then a dotted line from the council. So what this does essentially is it moves those 10 departments as direct reports to just the mayor. The mayor would appoint them, but the council would confirm them. So instead of a process today, back on the previous chart, here's how the appointments of those 10 departments work. The mayor has, as the charter calls it, the exclusive power to nominate. Then it goes to the executive committee, step 2. The executive committee gives it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If they give it a thumbs down, no go, and we go back to the mayor nominating somebody else. But if they give it a thumbs up, then it goes to the council. The council refers it to one of its standing committees to conduct a public hearing and make a recommendation. That hearing and recommendation then go to the council, and the council can either ratify the appointment or deny it, and we start over. So you can see there's like a 5-step process to appoint those 10 departments. Under this new provision, it would be the mayor would nominate and the council would confirm. So there is still a touch between both of them, checks and balances. The coordinator continues to supervise, appoint, and direct the 10 departments that report to the coordinator position today. The council as a legislative body continues to have its own aides and also supervises the city clerk as it does today, and would then appoint the city auditor, an elevated position that doesn't truly exist today. We have an internal auditor. This is promoting that job to a city auditor, which would report to the council and would conduct both financial and performance management audits of the administration under the mayor as a check and balance for the council. So this is the structure that would be in place if question number 1 were approved. Here's the ballot language. I won't read it to you, but this is the language that will appear on the ballot for question 1. Question 2. Question 2 is a proposal to amend the city charter that relates to a new department, public safety. This proposal was initiated by a citizen's petition that was carried by a citizens committee called Yes for Minneapolis. It's submitted to us under state law that you can see 410.12 subdivisions 1, 2, and 3. In the LIMS file where all of this information is contained is 2021-578. So the major elements of this proposal, if approved by voters, are shown on this slide. First, it would create a new public safety department, which would be a charter department. So think back to that chart that I just showed you, the 10 departments in the middle. This would be in that grouping, directly under the mayor and council. And it would provide for the mayor and council to consolidate the city's public safety functions through a comprehensive public health approach, which could include police officers if necessary, determined by the mayor and council. It would establish a department head for that new department called a commissioner, the commissioner of public safety, who would be responsible for leading the department. The commissioner would be nominated by the mayor and appointed by the council. It would remove from the charter the existing police department, and it would also remove from the charter what is currently in place, a mandatory minimum funding requirement, and the additional taxing authority to pay for that minimum funding requirement. And the reason this is important to put on here is because just like the executive committee was created by voters in 1984 as an amendment to our city's constitution, this provision was also created by referendum, approved by voters in 1961. And so because the voters put it in and the voters are now being asked to take it out, we highlight that issue. Here's a chart that should look a little familiar to us. This is the chart I showed of today, where you have the mayor and the council, and under them is that executive committee, that independent body, and beneath that independent body are the 10 charter departments. And you can see really the effect of this is that we're striking out the name police on one of those boxes, and we're putting on a new name called public safety. So I know there are a lot of questions and a lot of issues about this specific thing, and I don't mean to belittle it by making it sound this simple, and I'm happy to stand for questions at the end. But at a very, very, very high level, this is the impact of this question. It simply replaces one box with another that has a different name. It has a new leader called a commissioner. That person would go through the same appointment process that I outlined earlier, with the mayor bringing forward the nomination, and ultimately the city council would make the appointment. So here's the language of this second question on the ballot. Again, I won't read it to you. I will point out this one does have an explanatory note, which is intended to provide just a little bit more detail to voters in the polling place or the voting booth, because under state law, election workers are not allowed to explain when voters ask questions about what would this do. We can't do that. So we did offer this explanatory note to get a little bit more detail than what the plain question is. And that brings us to the third and final ballot question that you'll see on the ballot this year. This was a proposal that was initiated by the city council. So the city council initiated this proposal in order to propose a policy in the future, if it passes, related to rent control. Now we're calling it rent stabilization, but under state law, this subject matter is called rent control. And I'll tell you why that's important in just a minute. So I said this was initiated by the city council. I've shown you here on the slide, it's subject to 410.12 subdivision 5. You notice the common theme with all three of these amendments is they were all done subject to 410.12 and then some subdivisions. That's because 410.12 deals with amendments to home rule charters. But on this one, there's another one, 471.9996. And this is the state policy that says no unit of local government has any authority. The state says no, you may not have rent control policies at any city. So they've sort of cleared the field and said it's not allowed, except and only if you submit a question to the electorate and your voters say, yes, we give you that power. So that's why I've put that on here, because that's what led us, the city council, to put this question on the ballot this year. We cannot enact a rent stabilization policy except if the citizens say yes in the form of a ballot question. Here again, I've given you the LIMS file number, where you can find all of the background detail about this particular issue. So the major elements here, a little bit more straightforward. You'll see there's basically three, actually two, but the third one is just an explanation. If approved by voters, what this would do is it would amend Article 4 within our charter. Article 4 deals with the powers of city council. So it would say the city council would have the power, if approved by voters, to enact a rent stabilization policy, and it would become an enumerated power of the city council in that article. Number two, it would say that the city council could enact a rent stabilization policy in one of two ways. It could either adopt an ordinance on its own through its legislative process, or it could prepare the ordinance and then submit it to the voters to decide as a ballot question in a future election. If it did submit the question to voters for a decision, it would require more than half of all of the votes cast on that question to be in favor in order for it to pass. So again, a little bit of a visual aid. If voters say yes on the question this year, then starting next year and in future years, the council would have, as one of its enumerated powers in the charter, the ability to propose an ordinance to enact rent stabilization as a policy in Minneapolis. They would do that by creating an ordinance. An ordinance is legally defined as a municipal statute. So I talked about our charter is like our constitution. Legally, our ordinances have the same weight as state statutes. So it's a local law. So they would introduce and give notice of this ordinance. They would work with staff and experts to draft the provisions of the policy. They would conduct public hearings, all of that through the normal legislative process of the city council. And then that's when you get to the T. They would make one of two options. They could go ahead and on the left side of the screen, they could enact that ordinance themselves, which means by at least 7 affirmative votes and the approval of the mayor, or by 9 affirmative votes overriding the mayor, they could go ahead and enact the rent stabilization policy. Or they could go to the other side of the screen and they could take that ordinance and then put it on the ballot and refer it to voters. And if they did that, then if more than half of the voters voting on it affirmed that proposal, then it would be adopted as a rent stabilization policy for the city. Here is the language of that question that will be on the ballot. And this one also has an explanatory note. Again, a little bit more detail for voters who are in the polling place or in the voting booth to say, okay, if I vote for this, what does it mean? And then here is the actual picture of the ballot. So, this year we have ranked choice voting. So in all of the races, you'll have 3 columns and you'll have up to 3 choices in each race. We've taken advantage of the 3 columns. And so you can see on the far left is question number 1. In the middle is question number 2. And on the far right is question 3. Exactly with the language that I showed you, yes or no. Here is a list of resources that I would encourage you to look to where you can find more information. So this first one, I have to apologize. I don't run everything in the city, and I certainly don't run our IT department. And they like these really, really long URLs, which I hate. So the easy way to get to this is just to go into a Google search and type in Minneapolis current proposals. If you type in those 3 words, it'll take you to that page. And on that page, you'll find all 3 of those questions. You'll find the ballot language, you'll find the resolutions, you'll find all of the agendas, the meeting minutes, and everything else that led to the creation of those 3 questions. You can do the same thing through LIMS. So that second one is just another way to get to that detail. I've given you the LIMS file numbers again there. And then I also encourage you all to get your sample ballot. We are in the middle of early voting right now. Election day is November 2nd. That's just 19 days away. So we're halfway through early voting. And I would encourage you to access your sample ballot, which I'm going to show you here in just a minute, and use it as a practice ballot. So you can actually look through all the candidates and read the language of the ballot questions before you actually either use your vote by mail ballot or your early in person or on election day at the polls. So with that, my last slide has my name and my contact information. I encourage you to make use of it. If there are follow-up questions, concerns, or issues after tonight that you didn't ask or you wanted clarification, please feel free to reach out to me. My job, as I see it, is to provide very neutral, factual information and then encourage you to go talk to advocates on both sides of these questions. My job is to give you the facts. Their job is to excite you and get you passionate about an issue. So hopefully between those two, you're very well prepared to cast your informed vote on those ballot questions. And before I stop yammering, the one last thing I'd like to do with your approval is I'd like to open up our website, and that requires me to stop sharing and then reshare. So I'm going to try this again. And Meg, if you can just confirm that you can see my website again, which is hopefully the elections website.
Yep, I can see it.
So this one's a much easier URL. It's just, if you can see up here, vote.minneapolismn.gov. Very simple and straightforward, vote.minneapolismn.gov. You'll know you're there because it says elections and voter services, or your city, your vote. This is our elections website, and I want to share with you some treasures that the team have put out there that if you aren't aware of them, you should be. And you should be sharing these with your friends, families, and neighbors. Here under this tab called Voters, a drop-down menu is the most important link. What's on the ballot? If you click on this link, what's on the ballot, you're going to get several things. I'm going to walk through them as quickly as I can, but with enough detail that it will hopefully grab your attention and make you want to follow up. So the first thing I talked about is getting your sample ballot. This big blue button will connect you to the Secretary of State's website. You can access your sample ballot, which is an exact duplicate of your official ballot based on your assigned ward and precinct. Again, I encourage you to access your sample ballot, use it as a practice ballot, take it with you when you go to fill out your official ballot. It helps to make sure you marked everything the way you wanted to. The next thing you're going to find are the offices or the candidate profiles for the ballot. You know, we have 25 different municipal offices that we are voting on in this year's election and every municipal election. We have the mayor, the 13 city council members, 2 members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. We have a total of 9 members of the park board, 6 by districts, and 3 at large. The thing I want to draw your attention to here with the offices, hopefully you can see this blue link underneath that says who has filed for office. It's going to take me a couple of clicks to get there, but I'm going to show you why this is important if you haven't started the process of considering the candidates. So if you click here, we have listed all of the candidates, again, by those offices. We've done it by office. So the top of the ticket is the mayor. You can see all of the people who ran for mayor, and then by city council, Board of Estimate and Taxation, and park board. So you can see they're all there. And what you'll see is under each of those offices is another link. Here is the important treasure for all of you. I am prohibited under state law from providing links from my website to candidate websites. And so frequently we get people who say, well, how do I find out about candidates? And so a few years ago, we got a little tricky. Please don't tell your state legislators so they don't take this away from us. We found a way of using public data to hopefully help voters. If you click this link, we're going to connect you to the affidavit of candidacy for every single candidate. See? And I'm not going to pick favorites here. I'm going to come up here and just pick the first one I land on, and hopefully it's going to work. Candidates are allowed to identify a website. So right here, you can see there's a website and an email address. So if you want to know about candidates, every single one of them have the right to fill this out. All of this is public data, which is why we scanned it and posted it online to help voters find how to get more information about this candidate or communicate with them. We encourage candidates when they file with us to fill that out. We point it out to them. There are a few, I will tell you now, who chose not to fill it out. But FYI, we do get the websites and the email addresses for those. We encourage all candidates to fill it out. So we have posted for every single candidate in every single office on this page. Just find the links to the affidavits and you can go find information about the candidates. Now, back to the main site, what's on the ballot. Under the as sample ballot offices are the questions. And here again, we've listed the language of each of the 3 questions that I showed you. We've also provided translation in our major languages in the city, Hmong, Somali, and Spanish here. Then at the bottom, we've had this question a lot. You know, the ballot question, for example, this question right here, shall the Minneapolis City Charter be amended to authorize the City Council to regulate rents on private residential property of the city of Minneapolis with the general nature of those amendments indicated in the explanatory note? That is not the language that goes in the charter. You know that, I know that. That's not the language that goes in. So what is the language? What would the charter look like on any of these 3 questions if I vote yes? So if you click on this link, for each of those questions, we provide what lawyers sometimes call a red line version. All new text is underlined. All language that's going to be removed is crossed out. So, for example, this is the biggest one because it has the most changes. Here is the text of the city charter showing all questions or all changes. You can see the strikeout means that language goes out, the underlined language comes in, and you can scroll through the charter to see what it would look like. You can see the changes here, new information here, more information that's new, language that's removed. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then you can go look at the charter and go, okay, if I vote to adopt this, what would the effect be on our city's constitution? For each of the 3 questions, we've posted that information there. And then finally, the last thing, at the very bottom of this, what's on the ballot page are some common questions. I'm going to slow down a little bit here because this is important information. There's a difference when we amend the city charter, even though I call it our constitution, and when we vote on referenda to amend the state constitution. They're not the same process. And sometimes people don't understand that difference. And because we don't do either of the things very often, these are important questions, or it's important information to know. If you don't vote on one of those 3 ballot questions, does it count as a no? If you're voting on a state of Minnesota constitutional amendment, remember back in 2012, there was the voter ID constitutional amendment. If you did not mark your ballot, it counted as a no vote. The theory behind that is the legal principle that the law should not change unless deliberately moved by the electorate. Thus, a blank ballot counts as a no because the law defaults to status quo. That is not true for charter amendments. For local city charter amendments, a blank ballot is simply not counted. And we provided here a link to the state statute that proves that. So if you don't want to vote on any of those 3 questions and you don't mark your ballot, it doesn't count as a no. It simply is not counted. It's really more like abstention. It's like an abstention on a vote. It doesn't count as a yes. It doesn't count as a no. But then the other major change is how many votes are required to pass. We're all very familiar with normally called first past the post or simple majority. We usually say that as 50% plus 1, right? You need 50% plus 1 more, and that's approval. That is not true with charter amendments. Again, a little bit different, and here's the statute you can link to. To pass a charter amendment, a ballot question requires more than 51% of all of the ballots where a confirmed mark, yes or no, is done. Those must be in favor. So on election night, the first thing we will do is we will go through all of the ballots to identify where are there ballots where there is no yes and no marked, no marking at all. We will remove those from the tally, and then we'll go back through and count all of the yeses. We must have at least 51% of that total voting yes in order for that question to be adopted. And then finally, we do have a guide to how ballot questions are done. So if you're an insomniac and you have trouble sleeping, I encourage you to click on this because I put this book together and it goes through in painful detail with charts and details and everything else, citations to statute, about how the charter can be amended in its various ways and different permutations of amendment. But it's there as a reference tool. And with that, I finished my PowerPoint slide and I've walked you through our website. So I will be quiet. I'm happy to take any questions, Meg, if you'll help me do that.
Great. Yes, absolutely. I admire how you must have done this already a lot. Yes, you've got your presentation down really well. So what we're going to do is